Dzień dobry and good morning, good evening, because you might be watching this at various times across the world. I have a pleasure speaking today with Director of the Digital Ethics Center at Yale University, Professor Luciano Floridi, philosopher and ethicist of artificial intelligence, author of such books, amongst others. I've only read one, so just to be clear at the beginning, it's very transparent. I've only read one that you've co-authored on Life Manifesto, but you are also author of The Green and the Blue, Naive Ideas to Improve Politics in Digital Age, which I've read partially, and the Ethics of Artificial Intelligence, Principles, Challenges, Opportunities. And I think those three books will be the ideas I will be trying to borrow for this interview, if you allow me. But of course, you can change any topics if you want to, and introduce anything if you want to. Super glad to meet you, Mr. Professor, Mr. Floridi. And may I ask the first question, borrowing exactly from one of the books, your research is about creating a new philosophical framework for ICT technologies, and we often think that we live in times of ICT-related challenges that are happening all over the place. And if we can start with something practical and personal, if you think about your personal work, your personal life, what are the frameworks, thinking frameworks that help you deal on a daily basis with thinking about technology and challenges? Like, are you using something that helps you think, evaluate, imagine future? Are there any things that you think might be practical for other people to have as a framework of thinking about technology? Maybe philosophical, but something that's personal and practical for you on a daily basis.
Well, thank you. And also, thank you very much for this kind invitation. The question is unusual, so interesting. I think there are a couple of things that I try to keep clear in my mind. I'm going to put them in no particular order of importance. So imagine something in front of you, no 1, 2, 3, but everything from one side to the other. First of all, try to think in terms of and, not in terms of either or. So a lot of the conversation that we have on digital technology, but also in our society, politics, it's always either this way or that way. It has to be either for the market or for the environment. It's either innovation or regulation. So that way of thinking is simplistic, does not help, and often, although it requires more thinking and more work, it's short-sighted. Take the dichotomy innovation, regulation. Not true. It's simply false that either you innovate or you regulate. You can't do both. No, good innovation requires good regulations, and good regulations support good innovation. So stop thinking in terms of either or and start thinking in terms of this and that. The environment and society, etc. So that's the first thing.
Sure.
The other one is try to avoid the obvious narratives, the things that people don't even criticize anymore. This, oh yeah, obviously this is the way, so what do we do next? Stop and start thinking, is it really the case? Is that really true that this is what's going to happen? Like, for example, there's a democratic deficit in Europe. Yeah, because really? In what sense? What do you mean? Or, well, going back to the previous topic, US innovates, Europe regulates. No, really. There's massive amount of regulations in the United States, and there's a lot of innovation in Europe. So stop and think when the narrative seems to be so smooth, so welcoming, that basically takes you for a ride and you don't exercise your critical thinking.
Too
That's
easy.
the second thing that helps a lot. That's a couple of things that help my day, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. So if I can right away jump into the first point, because this is one of the questions I already had in my mind parking lot, that in Europe especially among entrepreneurs, there is a trend to complain about over-regulation in technology, exactly as you mentioned. So like thinking that US is no regulation at all, which is not true, but also forgetting about the public-private sector cooperation that led to many innovations in previous decades. Basically, the whole internet is a public-private and military combination of people who worked on that and added and innovated together at the end, we have something that we use today. So how do you view this contrasting approaches to technology? Like how to overcome this oversimplicity? And especially if you think about talking to people who do create technology, how they should think like beyond this this simplification, like what do they should, in practical terms, or maybe also ethical terms, how should they approach thinking about how technology could and should be regulated, maybe based on where they live, maybe based on ethical systems, like how we can introduce more complexity to that thinking?
I start from your last sentence. Unfortunately, as a matter of fact, if you start thinking slightly more deeply, if you add complexity to the problems you're dealing with, you don't do that just because you like complexity, but because things are complicated. I mean, of course, it requires more effort. It requires longer term thinking. It's less easy, but it pays back in the long term. Now, as someone who has lived for decades in the UK and now for at least a couple of years in the United States, on a personal basis, I mean, it's quite obvious that the European way of living is more advanced, is preferable, is more civilized. When we start talking about the fact that there are no people who, when they lose something, they lose everything, that we try our best to support everybody, from welfare to the pension system, from healthcare to education. This is not a jungle, and I'm talking about Europe. So when Europeans, and I'm including myself in the past, if you like, speaking as a sinner, say, oh, the United States. Well, the only winners in the United States are the rich and the powerful, meaning that most of the population is 3 months away from bankruptcy, meaning that you lose your house, your car, your health, your education, your pension, you have nothing left. Are we really sure that that's the world in which we want to live? So essentially, the answer to your question is, please consider the whole book called Society, not just one chapter. Mm-hmm. The chapter of economy, the GDP, the rich becoming richer, the enormous, disgusting gap between those who have and those who don't have anything. Now, that is at best, even in the most gentle interpretation, one chapter in the whole book. The other books are called culture, society, civil interactions, democracy, which we have to take less and less for granted. The possibility of actually criticizing your president or your parliament safely, because there is such thing as freedom of speech in Europe. Now, those are values that, of course, come with a tag, a price, a cost. But it would be like complaining that, if you go to a fantastic restaurant, well, at the end of the day, it's quite expensive. Yes, but it's a fantastic restaurant. So we almost forget that we pay the bill, but we forget the amazing restaurant that we have. Well, it goes both ways. So if you want to have, as it were, something cheap, well, you also don't pay much. So socially speaking, a society that does not invest in itself, does not invest in the future, well, of course, can possibly generate more wealth, if you like, for the few. But a society like the European society, well, that is a different kind of plan. Now, so all I'm saying here is widen up the perspective. Don't look only at how much money is generated every year, because that is just one important, fundamental, but one parameter among many.
10 years ago, in one of the interviews, and this is coming up lately as a viral quote from Sam Altman, the founder of OpenAI, like he has this very funny but very scary quote: "We might destroy the world with artificial intelligence, but in the meantime, we will create great AI companies," which is only thinking as a company as a goal, but thinking in general of costs of technology. And in your book, The Fourth Revolution, you talk a lot about costs of ethical infrastructure and this idea that we have to try to maybe not build the ethical infrastructure, but try to facilitate how we can, in general, move towards more ethical infrastructure. And I'm thinking about this, because this book is already a few years old, and last few years, I think the discussion about ethical infrastructures is even more difficult, thinking about how AI large language models are built, trained, how they are used, for what. Also, that this connection between political and commercial technologies. Like, do you think it's still possible to move towards ethical infrastructure, and maybe something changed from the time you've wrote this book? Maybe some different types of ethical infrastructure could be on the horizon, different approach to building that way.
Well, I think that so the book was written when Trump was president, the previous administration, and Brexit happened. Trust me, there is not much optimism in that book in terms of what was happening at the time. That was when I was doing the research for the book. I don't think things have changed much in terms of what we need to do. In fact, if anything, we need to do it even more now that, for example, there's a much bigger gap between the EU and the US, or even, for example, between Canada and the US. So if anything, the encouragement to do the right thing, to build, for example, ethical infrastructure, to build a more ethical digital society, it's more pressing today than it was in the past. What has changed is that the challenges are even, if you like, bigger now than they were just a few years ago. It is less likely that the United States will align themselves on fundamental values, including human rights. It is less likely that we will use all this technology to tackle the climate crisis, something that we are late already, something that is urgent yesterday. And it is even less likely that we will find goodwills around the world of the big players to push in the right direction. But it's almost like saying, because the problem is more acute, therefore the solution is less needed. No, of course, it's exactly the opposite. So the more acute the problems become, the more pressing the solutions are appearing. Now, of course, what is lacking, and I close here, is a sense of hope, inevitably. Now, we could have been more hopeful a couple of years ago, and or even more. In fact, we were very hopeful in the 90s, when, say, late 80s, early 90s, when I started working on all this, the internet, before the web, essentially. We had big hopes about what the internet could do.
Yeah.
So the more we get something that is realistic and unpleasant, if you like, the more we need to double the effort to send things in the right direction. Clearly, we're not much hope. So let me crack this joke, which I've used recently. We can't work on all this with hope, because it would be silly.
Yep.
But we can work on all this for hope, and that is essential.
Mm-hmm. So that strikes me very much, especially that I have like 15 years of activism, of digital activism, and being an educator about digital skills. To slowly wrap up our interview, I will just ask one more question. I think this is, again, from the perspective of a digital skills educator, asking an ethicist, asking a philosopher, how can you help me in my work? I was thinking about this a few days ago, having a training for local activists on artificial intelligence. I'm constantly thinking about how my skill set is changing. What skill set do I have to train people that I'm working with? And we were talking about local LLMs, and I can run a local LLM on my computer. We were talking about Poland building our own independent LLM as well. And I was thinking about, okay, like, is this enough in terms of autonomy, what I can do on my computer and what Poland can do, like building its own LLM model in this very interconnected world? Because like, I can do something on my computer, but only up to some level of my skills and maybe what the infrastructure will allow me to. Companies will still be dominating the market, at least for some time. Like, how we should redefine thinking about autonomy, both individual and maybe also on a country level, in this rapidly changing environment of how ICT is dominating decision making, politics, not talking about capitalism, that's obvious, but also like things that impact daily life of citizens across the world?
Well, I think that certainly what you suggested is doable and is valuable. I think that avoiding the either or logic, and I think something more can and should be done, which is hijacking and leveraging the logic of markets and capitalism to make sure that we deliver what we need and want in our society. Not therefore rejecting the markets and capitalism, but using it for different purposes. Let me give you a concrete example. LLMs these days, say the most obvious AI or foundation models, just to be even wider. We could do something in Europe that would put Europe immediately at the forefront of the China versus US debate, immediately. We could fund with very little money. I mean, we're talking about tens of millions of euros, not hundreds, not thousands, which for Europe is not basically peanuts. We could seriously support, certain level kind of support, open source LLMs made in Europe. Now, imagine the following. They will be free. So no one would buy American products. I mean, when you have very good, high quality, open source AI, shall we say, made in Europe. And they would be trustworthy because they would be GDPR, AI Act, etc. No, European strong compliance with the best of things. So no one would actually get the Chinese, which are free, but not trustworthy. So they wouldn't, no, your average company in South Africa, in Brazil, in South Korea, in Canada, in Japan, in India, they would probably use open source AI made in Europe, which is free and trustworthy. Why are we not doing it? The question is political. We need to think big. We need to think more, if you forgive me for the word, aggressively, in a nice way. But we need to play to win. We can't simply play to resist, to withstand, to delay the decadence, which is a bit of a European bad habit. It can be done. And as far as I know, I'm talking to some people in Europe. Hopefully you will listen. And that's just one single idea. There are many more.
And so, it's practical. Like I can implement this even as an educator working in Europe.
We can do it right now, right here. The very fact that we enable the web, remember, it was at the CERN, to be hijacked by, at the same time, politics on the one hand, surveillance, etc., and the commercial interest on the other, advertisement, the usual, well, it shows once again our inability to make the most of what we have in Europe. Time to stop. Time to play to win. We can do it. It's perfectly within our cards. I would like to see the political will behind it. And that seems to be lacking. So the frustration is, if you pass me the expression, mostly political. It's not in terms of innovation, it's not in terms of technology, and it's not in terms of know-how. We have all that by the bucket. It's not even in terms of finance. We go millions in this rich corner of the world. We are lacking the political strategy to implement a winning game. That is what we're lacking at the moment and what we need.
Still, that gives me hope because we can push on many different levels how we can support that political willingness. This was a pleasure, Professor Luciano Floridi. I thank you for that.
Thank you.
I think both practical and challenging us listeners, what we can think, what we can do about technology, not just being users that are very passive. I hope our listeners will get something practical and interesting from our talk. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.